Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting episode of Secrets of the Motorway. This week sees us in Cadnam, Hampshire, where we find the start of the M27 motorway at the Cadnam interchange. The M27 runs for a little bit less than 28 miles and has got a total of 12 junctions. The M27, like most motorways, was built in sections with the first opening in 1975. It wouldn't be until 1983 that the final sections were completed and it was all linked up. The first section ran from here at the Cadnam interchange up to junction 2, and then a few months later the next section opened, which took the motorway along to junction 4. If you were to head west from the Cadnam interchange, you'd enter the New Forest along the A31, and you might be wondering to yourself, well, why doesn't the motorway carry along through the New Forest? It's pretty much a motorway as it is, and there's ample space for it. Well, the answer is the New Forest. It's very unlikely that they've ever planned to extend the M27 west, because the New Forest has got some rather quirky planning laws. And the fact of the matter was, you'd never be able to build a motorway through the New Forest, so they didn't bother, and the A31 is considered good enough as it is. And that's probably true. Junction 2 is the exit for Peppa Pig World. I've managed to resist its charms and instead have come up to Junction 3, where you find the M271. The M271 is a 3-mile long motorway spur that comes off the M27, and it takes you down to Southampton Docks, and that makes sense. The most notable feature of the M271 is quickly discovered having taken a drive from its start point in Upton. Heading south, you'll very quickly come across a roundabout. Yes, a roundabout in the middle of a motorway with traffic lights and everything. For some reason, there isn't a flyover junction here, so the M271 has a roundabout bolted onto it where it meets the M27. This is stupid, but I do wonder if it makes the M271 the only motorway with a legit roundabout right in the middle of it. Moving on, and we're past junction 4 now, where the M27 and the M3 merge, and on your way to junction 5 you might notice that the motorway takes a sharp curve to the left, almost as if it was trying to avoid something. Originally, the plan was for the motorway to just cut straight through here, but at the time there was a Ford manufacturing plant here that employed 3,000 people. They weren't too happy with the plans because it would have involved the motorway cutting right through their factory. After a little persuasion, the motorway plans were altered and it was routed around the factory, giving us this tight curve that we've got today. The Ford manufacturing plant no longer exists. After junction 5, the next junction along is junction 7. And if you know how to count, you might have noticed that we're missing junction 6. And we are. You won't find junction 6 anywhere at all on the M27. And why is this? Because a road planner changed their mind. Well, most likely anyway. The original plan was that junction 6 would cater for an additional motorway spur, much like the M271 that we saw earlier, although probably much smaller and far more pointless. Had the spur been built, it would have served the ever-growing residential areas in and around the Town Hill Park area. It was quite a hard sell, really, because the motorway spur wouldn't really have connected anything of real significance, and the costs outweighed the benefits significantly as well, so it's pretty much a non-starter. The only real justification for building this motorway spur was that there was a new housing estate being built nearby, but it wasn't enough. The plan was cancelled and put into the general file forevermore. However, when constructing the new housing estate and installing Town Hill Way, the main road in and around the estate, they left enough space for it to perhaps be upgraded to a dual carriageway or even a motorway at a later date. You know, just in case someone changed their mind. Between junctions 8 and 9, the M27 crosses over the River Hamble, and it's here that you'll find several boat manufacturers, a trade and skill that's been happening on the River Hamble as far back as the medieval times. At junction 9, you might notice a pair of really long slip roads that you can't access. These make up a set of ghost slip roads that were installed along with the M27 to serve a motorway service station that was never built. It was the usual situation where they purchased and excavated the land as well as installing the motorway slip roads and then changing their minds and not bothering with the services there at all. Had it been built, it would have most likely been called Meon Valley Services. But it wasn't built. Now, you might spot a row of solar panels on the now disused slip road. You might spot them. I'm not 100% sure if they're still there, but we'll have a look. If there are 2 banks of solar panels which run for around 50 metres in length. They were installed in 2004 as part of a test to see if enough electricity could be generated to power things like motorway lighting. It sounds like a great idea. However, it turns out the cost to buy, install and maintain the panels far outweighs any cost saving you'd see over a 30-year period, making it a pointless endeavour, which is why we've never seen it repeated on any other motorway. Speaking of slip roads, junction 10 is a fairly simple design that happens to be missing a set of slip roads. However, this is actually an intentional design, the idea being that it would limit traffic entering Fareham via the A32. It made sense, but in more modern times, not so much. There are plans to build a 6,000 home garden village right next to Junction 10. And in its current setup, it's quite easy to see that Junction 10 is probably not going to like all of that increase in traffic so much. So what's the solution? Well, you chuck £81 million at it and this is what you get. A revised Junction 10 that saw planning permission granted earlier this year. The new junction design will see the removal of the westbound looped exit and the slip roads move further up the road. The current eastbound slip road will remain in place. As we continue along the M27, it enters a cutting which pretty much obscures your view of the surroundings. If that wasn't the case, then you might spot the Nelson's monument on the hilltops as you head past Junction 11. It was built in 1808 to commemorate Britain's naval glory and preeminence, and then was rebuilt in 1899 for some reason. It sits next door to Nelson's Fort, which is named after the monument. Nelson Fort is one of 5 forts that were built in the 1860s across Portsdown Hill to protect the very important naval base at Portsmouth. They're typically 6-sided buildings surrounded by large moats or ditches. In this case, the fort covers an area of around 19 acres and is a Grade 1 listed building. It's currently in use today by the Royal Armouries. Having not likely seen any of that from the motorway, you'll soon arrive at Junction 12, which is where the M27 and the M275 merge in this rather odd arrangement. The M275 certainly does seem to have a little bit of an odd shape about it, and I believe it's at this interchange where you'll find one of the tightest curves to be found on our motorway network. The M275 is a mere 2 miles long and was set up to give easy access to Portsmouth docks. Junction 1 of the M275 has got a bit of an interesting story. When planning the motorway back in the 70s, they wanted to build Junction 1 where it is today. But at the time, because of regulations saying you couldn't have junctions that were less than 1.5 miles apart, they ended up not bothering due to its close proximity to the M27 interchange. Perhaps frustratingly, they'd already built some of the infrastructure required and rerouted Tipner Lane in preparation for this junction that would never happen due to the regulations. Until it did. In 2005, the plan was resurrected, and to get around the regulations, they opted to reduce the speed limit on the motorway, and thus that allowed the junction to be built. After approximately 35 years then, the junction opened as planned. On your way down the M275, you won't miss the Sails of the South, a 43-metre high trysail structure that serves as a landmark at the entrance of Portsmouth. It was built in 2001 and utilises 60 cables to hold tension across its fabric membrane. It had the ability to measure and wirelessly transmit the load forces on the cables to a control room somewhere else, and it was designed to withstand the strong wind currents that you might expect across an open harbour. Back to the M27 then, and it pretty much ends at the Hillsea interchange where it meets the M275. But there were plans for the M27 to continue on from Portsmouth all the way down to Chichester. Even whilst constructing the M27, it was always assumed that it would go as far as Chichester, but for some reason this never happened. Once they built the M27 as far as Portsmouth, they sort of stopped after the project was cancelled in 1978, and instead they built what can only be described as an all-purpose dual carriageway rather than a motorway. Despite this, until you get to Chichester, the A27 might as well be a motorway because it seems to have been built to that standard. But it's been rumoured that this section of the A27 will never open as a motorway because the width of the carriageway falls short of motorway regulations by a matter of inches. That's all we've got time for this week then, guys. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, what are you doing? Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John, you've been watching Auto Shenanigans. I'll see you guys next time for another exciting episode of Secrets of the Motorway. Until then, take care, bye-bye.